Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We're diving deep again into ideas that really shape how we understand our faith and, well, just life itself.
Glad to be here.
So think about this for a moment. Those times when everything feels overwhelming, maybe circumstances just feel completely out of your hands. And words, they just fail you. Your deepest sorrows, they feel too heavy, too quiet even to, find a voice.
Yeah, we've all been there, I think.
What if, right in those most silent moments when you feel completely helpless, what if you were actually communicating? Maybe even communicating most directly with God.
That's quite a thought, isn't it? That
Yeah.
helplessness could actually be effective communication. It really turns our usual ideas about prayer, maybe, on their head.
Absolutely. And that's what we do here on the Deep Dive. We take these compelling sources, these ideas, and we try to pull out the most significant insights, helping you get a real handle on important concepts quickly and hopefully thoroughly.
And today, we're digging into some truths from a maybe unexpected place for some listeners.
Yeah.
A classic sermon, but one that still speaks so clearly today, well over 100 years later.
We are doing a deep dive into the power of a sigh. It's by the very well-known 19th century preacher, Charles Haddon Spurgeon.
Spurgeon, often called the Prince of Preachers. His influence, especially in evangelical circles, was just immense. And this sermon, he gave it April 22nd, 1886. So yeah, quite a while ago now, at the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London.
And it all centers on just one verse, a single verse from the Psalms. But wow, it is packed.
There really is. Psalm 12, verse 5. That's the one.
Right. It says, "For the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now will I arise, saith the Lord. I will set him in safety from him that puffeth at him."
There's a lot in there. Oppression, poverty, neediness, sighing, and then this powerful response from God.
Yeah.
Now will I arise.
Exactly, and Spurgeon just unpacks it beautifully. So that's our plan today.
Yeah, we'll break down Spurgeon's message. First, look at how he describes the tough situations God's people often find themselves in. It's quite realistic.
Then, and this is the core bit, how their quietest expressions of grief, those sighs, can actually move God to act.
And finally, the incredible ways God brings deliverance. How he provides comfort, especially when his people feel they can't do anything themselves.
So get ready for, I think, some unexpected comfort, maybe some surprising ways to think about suffering, because this deep dive really shows how even our quietest, most helpless moments can, in a way, speak loudest to God. They can draw out his sovereign, compassionate help.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start by setting the stage. Thinking about the kind of circumstances Spurgeon was talking about. He looks back at David's time, the author of Psalm 12.
Right. Spurgeon says David lived in very evil times, and you can hear it in David's own words in that song. Things like, "Help, Lord, for the godly man ceaseth, for the faithful fail from among the children of men."
That really paints a picture, doesn't it? A sense of deep spiritual decline, maybe societal decay too, like truth and faithfulness are just vanishing.
It does. And what's immediately helpful, I think, especially from our Reform standpoint, is the sense of historical connection Spurgeon brings right away.
Oh, so...
Well, he says, look, bad as the times may be in which we live, there have been bad times before these. It's a simple point, but it lands.
Yeah, it means we're not the first. We aren't alone in facing times where, the love of many is waxing cold, or where finding truth feels like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Exactly. And that historical view, it sort of normalizes suffering for believers.
Yeah.
It suggests that difficulty, opposition, these aren't exceptions. They're actually recurring patterns for God's people throughout history, almost part of God's providential plan, not a sign that something's uniquely wrong with our time.
That is helpful, because it can feel so isolating when you're in the thick of it, can it? Like your struggles are brand new, worse than ever before. But knowing that generations before us weathered storms, as Spurgeon puts it, and found their desired haven, that gives real assurance. It points to God's faithfulness across the ages.
Right. If he sustained them through their dark times, then the same God who doesn't change, who is sovereign in his care, well, he's with us too. It highlights God's consistency, his providential hand guiding things even when truth seems absent or godliness seems rare.
So that foundation, God's faithfulness, the reality of trials, that really sets up Spurgeon's whole message from this verse.
It does. He basically structures his sermon around three main points from Psalm 12.5. And these will be our guideposts for this deep dive.
Okay, what are they?
First, God's people might find themselves in a really sad situation, just plain difficult circumstances.
Okay.
Second, even then, God's people have a friend close by, a friend who hears even their sighs, those quiet expressions.
A friend who hears sighs.
And third, this friend will come to their aid when he acts. He'll bring about a real change. deliverance.
Right. Sad situation, the listening friend, and active help. Got it. Let's dig into that first one. God's people in a very sad situation. Where does Spurgeon start with that?
He starts by looking closely at the words poor and needy in the psalm. He says they're not quite the same thing. There's a distinction.
Oh, how does he see them differently?
Well, poor, he explains, is about lacking material wealth. Pretty straightforward. Struggling to make ends meet for yourself, maybe. Difficult enough.
Sure.
But needy, Spurgeon says, adds another layer. It's like poverty plus the burden of dependence or extra responsibilities. His example is having many mouths to feed.
Ah, okay. So you might manage on scraps for yourself, but if you've got kids or others relying on you, your need is much greater, much heavier. That makes sense.
Exactly. It multiplies the difficulty. And right here, Spurgeon challenges some maybe deeply held assumptions, even for believers.
What kind of assumptions?
He just says straight out, it should not surprise any of us if we find ourselves to be poor and needy. He's saying, don't automatically think being poor or needy means God has abandoned you or is displeased with you.
Which goes against a lot of thinking, maybe especially today, where wealth is sometimes seen as a sign of God's blessing.
Right. Spurgeon argues almost the opposite. He says God often chooses his very best and brightest servants from among the poor. It's countercultural, but he backs it up.
How does he back that up? Biblically, I assume.
Oh, yes. He points out, first, the gospel is preached to the poor. That's who Christ often ministered to, those on the margins.
Good point.
He also reminds us of Jesus' own caution about how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom, suggesting wealth can actually be a spiritual hindrance, not always a blessing.
It can create self-reliance, maybe.
Perhaps. And then he brings in Paul from 1 Corinthians 1. God choosing the foolish things to confound the wise, the weak things, to confound the things which are mighty.
God turning worldly values upside down.
Precisely. And then there's James, the Apostle James, asking, hath not God chosen the poor of this world rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom?
So the biblical case is strong. Material poverty doesn't equal spiritual poverty. In fact, it might be the opposite sometimes.
That's Spurgeon's argument. He's saying, based on Scripture and just observation, that a lack of earthly goods can actually be God's chosen way to cultivate deeper spiritual blessings, like faith, dependence, humility. It speaks to God's sovereign wisdom in choosing his people and his methods.
It's almost like that richness in faith is born out of necessity, out of having less of the world to rely on.
Yeah, Spurgeon puts it quite poetically. He says God's electing affection seems to be looking far oftener into the cottage than into the palace.
That gives a lot of comfort, doesn't it? And a totally different lens for viewing our circumstances. Being poor and needy isn't necessarily a sign you're outside God's favor. For Spurgeon, it might mean you're exactly in the place where God often does his deepest spiritual work.
It redefines what real success, real blessedness looks like. It's not about earthly wealth, but spiritual richness and relationship with God.
Okay, so poverty and neediness are one part of this sad situation. What else does Spurgeon highlight?
Well, he talks about oppression and slander, the kind of attacks that righteous people often face. And he uses David's life again as the prime example.
David certainly faced his share of that.
Constantly. From his youth, Spurgeon notes. Remember when Samuel came to anoint a king from Jesse's sons? David wasn't even called in from the fields. He was overlooked, maybe despised by his own family.
Right, left with the sheep. And his older brother Eliab really gave him a hard time before the Goliath fight, didn't he? Accused him of pride.
Yes, dismissed him as arrogant. And then, of course, after the victory over Goliath, things got much worse with King Saul.
Ah, the song, Saul hath slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. That really set Saul off.
It did. That praise turned Saul's heart to jealousy, and then began years of Saul hunting David, trying to kill him, even though David had done nothing wrong, had been loyal. It's a clear picture of how doing right can sometimes provoke malice from others.
It's a hard truth.
It is. And Spurgeon points out that God's servants can get a very bad name, sometimes precisely because of their righteousness. He brings up Joseph in Egypt.
Joseph thrown in prison.
Right. Not for any crime, but specifically, Spurgeon says, for his chastity and purity in resisting Potiphar's wife.
So unfair treatment is part of the potential sad situation.
Yes, but here's the key from a reform view. Spurgeon emphasizes that even though the treatment is unrighteous and unjust from the human side, God, in his sovereignty, consistently overrules it for good.
How does he describe that?
He uses an analogy. He likens it to the necessary breaking in of a rough colt that's destined for something great. It's discipline, training. He even quotes Lamentations. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth.
So, these trials, this opposition, they actually serve a purpose in God's plan. To cultivate humility, dependence, strength, like refining fire.
Exactly. Preparing God's chosen people for what he has for them later. It's about spiritual formation through hardship, under God's sovereign hand.
That gives suffering a different meaning. It's not pointless.
No. And Spurgeon advises his listeners, don't be surprised if your path to heaven is rough. He says we should maybe wonder more if we hit a smooth patch.
That's one way to look at it.
He even warns against getting too comfortable with praise. He says Palm Sunday is not far off Good Friday.
Meaning the crowds that cheer you today might turn on you tomorrow, like they did with Jesus.
Precisely. Don't put too much stock in human approval.
Yeah.
It's fickle. Our real standing, our real reward comes from God alone. It keeps us grounded in reality and a sober understanding of the Christian life.
Okay, so we have poverty, neediness, oppression, slander. What else contributes to this sad situation?
There's the pain of being silenced. When things get so bad, you can't even speak up for yourself. Spurgeon says sometimes oppression is so severe that people feel scarcely able to speak for themselves at all. They feel shut up and silenced.
Why silenced? Fear.
Fear of making things worse, maybe. Fear of retaliation. They might not dare voice their claims for justice or even confide in friends because it could lead to further mischief. So they have to bear it alone, in silence.
That sounds incredibly isolating, a solitary anguish.
It is. And in those moments, Spurgeon says, when words are gone, when your tongue is tied, the only language left is the sigh.
The sigh.
He calls it that expressive token of an inward, unutterable grief. It's communication beyond words. A raw, involuntary outpouring when there's just nothing left to say.
That's very descriptive. Does he give an example?
Yes, a powerful one. Hannah in the Old Testament, remember her story? Barren, provoked by her rival, Peninnah, she goes to the temple in deep distress.
And she's praying, but
only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. She was praying silently, pouring out her soul. And Eli, the priest, sees her and completely misunderstands.
he thought she was drunk.
Exactly. It shows how deep grief, silent grief, can be misconstrued even by religious leaders. But her silent suffering, expressed only in moving lips and presumably sighs from her heart, that was her most desperate prayer. Misunderstood by man, but heard by God.
Wow. That's a powerful illustration of silent prayer being heard.
Definitely. And there's one more aspect of this sad situation Spurgeon mentions, which ties back to the verse itself, being despised and puffed at.
Puffed at? What exactly does that mean? It's an odd phrase.
It is. Spurgeon breaks it down. He says, puffeth at him means expressing contempt, scorn, disdain, often not even with words, but with sounds or gestures.
Like what?
Like, oh, him, pshaw, or her, oh, well, she, pooh. Maybe a shrug of the shoulders. It's dismissal, belittling.
So it's not a direct accusation, but more of a vague, dismissive contempt?
Right. Spurgeon says it's vaguely casting out someone's name as evil, which he notes is always worse than stating it directly, because it's hard to refute. There's nothing solid to grab onto.
It's an insidious kind of attack, undermining someone without making a clear charge.
Yeah. Spurgeon calls it dastardly, cowardly, really. If you have a real issue, state it plainly. Don't just puff with disdain. He reminds us David himself was puffed at by his own brother Eliab before the Goliath fight. Dismissed as proud and naughty.
Even though he was the one God had chosen.
Right. And Spurgeon's advice here is just remarkable. It shows real mental strength rooted in God's sovereignty.
What does he advise?
He tells his listeners basically, don't worry about it. He says, never mind, young man. Never mind what they say. They say, and they say, and they say. And when they've said it thrice, let them say it again as often as they please.
Just ignore it. Keep going.
Pretty much. Keep going faithfully on the path God has set for you. Trust God. Serve him, regardless of what they say. Because your value, your purpose, isn't based on shifting human opinions. It's based on God's decree, his plan for your life. Focus on your audience of one.
That builds real resilience, doesn't it? Not letting those dastardly attacks derail you.
Absolutely. So that's the picture Spurgeon paints of the sad situation. Poverty, need, oppression, being silenced, being despised. It's stark, human vulnerability laid bare.
But the amazing thing, as you said, is how Spurgeon claims this very despair, this inability to even speak, becomes the most powerful kind of prayer.
Exactly. Which brings us perfectly to the second main point, where the real comfort starts to flood in. God's people have a friend at hand, a friend who hears even their sighs.
And what a friend he is. Spurgeon actually shares a personal story here, doesn't he, from his wife?
Yes, it's quite touching. Apparently, his wife had chosen Psalm 12.5 for an almanac they published, maybe for daily readings. And later, a woman, a dear child of God, wrote to Spurgeon.
What did she say?
She said she found immense comfort in that verse because she was going through deep sorrow and found herself sighing often. And she offered this beautiful illustration of what the verse meant to her.
An illustration about the sigh.
Yes, involving a mother and her child. This is so relatable. She said, if her little child makes a petulant cry, maybe demanding, whiny, and she might not jump up immediately. She knows it might be selfish, not real distress.
Okay, makes sense.
But, she said, if the child lets out just a weak and very sad and a little sigh, just a soft, involuntary sound of real hurt or sadness.
Then what?
Then the mother cannot stand that, but goes to it at once. The sigh, the woman wrote, fetches the mother out of bed. It has this great effect because it signals genuine, helpless distress.
Wow. That's the core insight. The sigh is involuntary. It's a sign of weakness, deep sorrow, not a demand, not a complaint, but just this raw expression of helplessness.
And that's what moves the mother's heart. It's a response to true pain, not manipulation.
So how does Spurgeon apply this to God?
Well, the parallel is direct, and especially for us thinking in Reformed terms about God's intimate care for his chosen people, it's quite illuminating. It shows how God is moved by that involuntary, quiet, helpless grief from his children, maybe even more than by loud, demanding, well-articulated prayers.
So when sorrows are so bitter that the sufferers can scarcely pray, when even their desires seem to fade and only sighs are left.
Spurgeon says God cannot be still. He must get up. God hears the grief when the grief has no voice. He hears the sorrow when the sorrow cannot find a tongue. It speaks volumes about God's deep, fatherly compassion for his own.
It's quite something, isn't it, that the Almighty God, the Infinite One who created the heavens, that he is all there, completely attentive when one of his children simply sighs.
Spurgeon emphasizes this. He says God's heart is touched, his bowels are moved, his whole being is full of an infinite compassion. It's not some detached observation. It's an active, empathetic response from the sovereign creator himself.
A response driven by love.
Yes. Spurgeon speaks of God's overwhelming love that compels him, moves him, to speed to their relief. He even contrasts this with the arrogant words of the wicked mentioned just before this verse, those who say, "Our tongues are our own, who is Lord over us."
So God might just ignore that proud boasting.
But the sad sigh of his children, that gets his immediate attention. It shows a unique sensitivity God has for his own people, rooted in his covenant faithfulness.
This love, this responsiveness that leads directly to that powerful phrase in the verse, "Now will I arise, saith the Lord." What does Spurgeon make of that phrase, "Now will I arise"?
He says it signifies God becoming fully roused, like someone getting up from rest, maybe rolling up his sleeve to make bare his arm, getting ready for serious work, setting himself with full intent to do something, requiring all his skill and might.
It's such an active image, God taking decisive action.
Yes. It contrasts with passages like Isaiah 45, which says, "God sometimes hideth thyself." Spurgeon suggests that while God often works behind the scenes, the deep, silent anguish of his people causes him to reveal his power more openly.
And when God arises,
Spurgeon says, he shakes terribly the earth. Nothing stands before him when he once arises. It's irresistible, omnipotence on display, and the trigger, the sighing of his needy people. That humble sound moves the Almighty to unleash his full power.
that's a profound thought, our weakest expression eliciting God's strongest response.
It really is, and it connects to God's sovereign plan. His plan includes our suffering, yes, but also his certain powerful intervention in response to our humble dependence, showing his active rule over everything.
Does Spurgeon offer a big biblical example of this? God arising because of sighs.
Oh, the classic example, Israel and Egypt. Remember, says the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. They groaned under Pharaoh's oppression.
Their cry came up to God.
Exactly. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. His action wasn't random. It was a direct response to their suffering, their sighs, grounded in his covenant promises.
The sighing came first, then the arising?
Precisely. Spurgeon even brings in Handel's oratorio, Israel in Egypt.
Yeah.
He mentions how the music itself seems to capture that sighing sound.
Really?
Yeah, he says the sigh is the beginning, the meaning of it all. It's the catalyst. It leads to God's mighty acts, the plagues, the Red Sea parting, and that final triumphant shout. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea.
It vividly connects the people's suffering, expressed in sighs, to God's massive redemptive intervention in history.
It does. It underscores that active relationship between God and his covenant people. And Spurgeon drives home the point that this isn't just ancient history.
How so?
He declares, the same God lives for you as he lived for Jacob's seed. Your sorrow today, your sigh, can still touch that heart of God, and he will deliver you as he delivered them.
So it's the same consistent, faithful, compassionate God. His providential care is just as real for us now.
That's the assurance, which leads us straight into the third point. What happens when God does arise? When his people fetch their friend with their sighs?
The verse says, I will set him in safety from him that puffeth at him. So it's about deliverance, safety.
Active, decisive deliverance and vindication. And again, Spurgeon uses David's life, particularly his relationship with Saul, as the perfect illustration.
How David handled Saul's persecution.
Yes. Remember, David had clear chances to kill Saul. In the cave at En-Gedi, he just cut off a piece of Saul's robe. Later, in Saul's camp, he took the spear and water jug, but wouldn't let Abishai strike Saul down.
He refused to take vengeance himself. Remarkable restraint.
Spurgeon calls it a grand proof of the power of faith. Faith to not touch the one hunting you. And he draws the principle for us. If you're a child of God, you'll say, no, vengeance isn't mine. It's not my job to repay.
Instead, maybe even show kindness, like Jesus taught. Love your enemies.
Exactly. And Spurgeon says, when God's child refuses to lift a hand to save themselves, trusting entirely in God's timing and justice, that's when God says, okay, now I will do it. I will act. He takes up their cause.
And for David, God did act. Saul eventually fell in battle against the Philistines.
Right. Saul's pursuit ended, and David was finally anointed king over all Israel. He was set in safety from Saul, the one who had puffed at him with contempt for so long. It shows God's sovereign power to vindicate his faithful servants in his own way, in his own time. God defends his own.
So how does this deliverance, this safety actually look? Does Spurgeon describe the methods God uses?
Yes, and he highlights that God's methods vary, showing the diversity of his providential care. Sometimes it's very direct, very physical.
Like what?
He might literally lift his people out of their troubles, move them somewhere else, maybe even put them in positions of authority over those who previously oppressed them. A complete reversal of circumstances.
Like Israel being brought out of Egypt, or Joseph becoming second in command.
Exactly. A clear, visible intervention that changes everything externally.
But that's not the only way, is it?
No. Other times, Spurgeon says, God allows the adversaries to puff. The opposition continues. But he gives his people so much grace and so much faith that they rise above it internally.
So the circumstances don't change, but the person does.
Right. He says all the bitterness is gone, all the injuries removed, not necessarily the external cause, but its effect on the soul. The trial is transformed into something that actually leads to more prayer and to a closer walk with God.
It becomes a means of spiritual growth, even amidst the difficulty, peace in the storm.
Precisely. It's a shift from external change to internal strengthening. And Spurgeon uses another illustration here from John Bunyan.
Pilgrim's Progress.
Yes. He refers to Giant Pope, who in Bunyan's time represented the waning power of persecution. The giant is still there, but he can only sit in his cave's mouth, grinning at pilgrims, unable to actually harm them anymore.
Ah, so the threat might still exist, but God makes it ineffective, renders the puffing harmless.
Exactly, because God has equipped his people with spiritual resilience. So whether God removes the trial or strengthens his people to endure it peacefully, the result is safety. Both are expressions of his sovereign goodness and care.
And does this safety apply to spiritual battles too, not just human opposition?
Oh, definitely. Spurgeon makes that clear. He says even Satan, the archenemy, can be the one who puffs. His temptations, his accusations, can feel like dismissive puffs if God protects his people.
How does God protect them?
By covering them with armor of proof, Spurgeon says, making it so that even the devil's temptations cannot bring a poisoned arrow into your soul. It's about God's protective hand over his elect.
And our confidence comes from Christ.
Absolutely. Spurgeon points to Jesus, our master, who met him Satan in the wilderness and fought him in a threefold duel and ultimately triumphed over him completely.
Leaving marks of his sword on him, as Spurgeon puts it.
Yes. And because Christ won, even the weakest believer, covered by Christ's victory, can say with confidence, quoting Micah, "Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy. When I fall, I shall arise."
Because God's help, brought by our sighs, connects us to his omnipotence.
An omnipotence that is infinitely more than a match for all the powers of darkness. That's a core Reformed understanding, isn't it? Our victory isn't ours. It's Christ's victory applied to us.
So the focus has been very much on God's people, his children, the elect, his specific care for them when they sigh.
Yes, that's the main thrust, drawn from the context of the psalm.
But Spurgeon doesn't stop there, does he? He seems to broaden the invitation.
He does, with a really generous heart. Towards the end, he extends the comfort of this passage even to those who might feel they are not the children of God, but are still in trouble.
What does he tell them?
He reassures them that God is very pitiful and full of compassion, even towards, as he puts it, natural and ungodly men when they are in trouble. God's general mercy is wide.
It's a demonstration of God's common grace, his general benevolence to all creation.
I think so. Spurgeon uses the example of God hearing the young ravens when they cry. Ravens can't pray spiritual prayers, obviously. It shows God's willingness to hear any cry rising from sorrow, regardless of the source or its spiritual sophistication.
Like the psalm says, as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. But Spurgeon suggests God's pity extends, in a general way, even beyond those who fear him.
Yes, there's an open door for anyone in distress to turn towards him. His fundamental nature is compassionate.
And this leads him to make a direct appeal, a call to pray.
It does. He shares another story, quite moving, about a man who recently joined his church. This man had been gravely ill, desperately trying different medicines.
And
then it hit him. He'd never prayed to God to make me well. He'd never asked God for help. So he did. He prayed his first simple prayer, perhaps to a God he barely knew, just asking for healing.
And God answered?
Yes, God answered that prayer. And that initial answer led the man to pray more, and eventually, Spurgeon says, to trust Jesus Christ for the salvation of his soul.
So God used that basic human need, that cry for help in sickness, as a starting point to draw him closer.
Exactly. It shows how God can meet people right where they are, in their physical or emotional distress, and use that as an entry point for a deeper relationship.
So the encouragement for anyone listening who feels distant from God is
simple. Do try him and trust him for yourselves. That's Spurgeon's plea. He assures them he will listen to your sighs and your cries and your tears. Only turn to him with full purpose of heart, and he will not cast you away.
It's a message of hope, that even the smallest, most hesitant turning towards God can be met with his compassion.
A very hopeful and open invitation.
Okay, so as we sort of wrap up this deep dive into Spurgeon's The Power of a Sigh, what are the main takeaways? We've seen how he helps us understand this silent but really impactful language of the sigh.
Yeah, that when words fail us, when troubles feel overwhelming, those quiet, maybe even involuntary expressions of grief can genuinely reach God's heart. They can stir him in his sovereignty and compassion to act powerfully.
And there's comfort in knowing our trials aren't unique. They fit into a pattern we see throughout history for God's people, part of his providential working.
Right. And his deliverance isn't one size fits all. It might be removing the problem altogether, or it might be giving us that inner peace and strength to endure it faithfully, knowing his hand is guiding everything.
So the big idea is this picture of God who is incredibly near, incredibly attentive, actively responding to the deepest unspoken grief of his people, offering help, offering strength.
And crucially, extending an invitation to anyone in distress, whether they feel close to God or far off, to turn to him. Because he is fundamentally a God of compassion who hears.
So here's a final thought to maybe ponder. In our world today, we put so much emphasis on speaking up, articulating our needs, making our case,
Very true. Communication is key, we're told.
So what does it really mean that the Almighty God, according to Spurgeon in this psalm, seems to hear and respond most clearly, most powerfully to what cannot be spoken, to that silent, raw expression of sorrow, that sigh?
It's a challenging thought. Perhaps genuine connection, genuine help doesn't always start with our words, but maybe in that place of stillness, that vulnerable moment when all we have left is a sigh directed towards him.
Something to think about. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the power of a sigh here on Reformed Thinking.
We hope it's given you some fresh insight and perhaps some real comfort today.